incubator called Obvious Corp. So it was a classical incubator who had like 4 or 5 projects going on. Twitter was one of those other projects. Jack was the father of the Twitter project. And Odeo ended up shutting down. Evan Williams was magnanimous to the investors and gave the investors their money back. Here's an entrepreneur that felt so bad, and he had made a little bit of money, not a ton of money, certainly not enough to give your money back. He had made a little bit of money selling Blogger to Google, but he felt an obligation to pay the investors back. And I said, Ev, this is going to sit in the bank until your next one. And the next one was Twitter. So I invested $75K in Twitter, sight unseen, zero due diligence, because I believed in that entrepreneur. And then I got to know Jack and look at Twitter today.
So you were already signed up for Twitter.
I was
before it was born.
I was pre-booked. Yeah. I was pre-boarded on that airplane.
Interesting. That's what I call betting on founders.
With no questions asked.
What did you think of Twitter as an idea?
Guess what? Never argue with the metrics. So Twitter, it wasn't long before Twitter's growth rate on users and numbers of tweets was straight up. They're just now, revenue's going to catch up with it, and it's going to be an awesome company. But I never argue with growth. So whenever we see a company that's growing at 1,000% a month, and in the early days when you're successful, you will grow at 1,000% a month, because going from 1 users to 10 users is. But if they're happy users, and there's word of mouth, because Twitter never advertised, and there's good word of mouth and good PR, that's the greatest company you can get. Look at the growth of Google. Google was the very same way.
So Twitter, you thought basically, I don't know what this thing is, but the graphs seem to be going up.
But it's growing, which means users like it, which means it's going to be successful.
There must be something there.
Because if you look at Google, Facebook, and Twitter, none of them had any idea what the monetization outcome was going to be. All they focused on was happy users and getting lots of them quickly. And that ends up, that's a great strategy. That's what Ben Silverman is doing at Pinterest today.
So they just knew that there was an important problem to be solved, and they sort of had faith they would be able to make money somehow.
Of course.
As it turned out.
But now, Google's the one who probably took the biggest risk. Because now, Ben can at least look back to Google, Facebook, and Twitter and say, wow, they made sure they had like 100 million happy users, and then they thought about monetization. And you actually don't need to think about monetization that much. Once you get to 100 million users, it gives you time to figure out, hey, wait a minute, there's ways to turn this into a really viable business.
So when Larry and Sergey were starting out doing Google, they really didn't know how they were going to make money.
No, not at all. I still have Google's first 10-page investor slide deck, and you get to the last page and it says thank you. It doesn't have it does not have the spreadsheet that is usually the last page. And they were not apologetic about it. They said, we have awesome technology and it will lead to monetization. And we're not going to tell you something we don't know, because we don't know how we're going to monetize it. They were very honest about it.
And that was a novel thing in those days.
That was very novel. And that's why people misconstrued that as arrogance, when in fact Larry and Sergey were just being really bluntly honest with the investors that came in to see them. They were like, hey, if you look at our search results, and they were so much better than the prior search engine, which I was an investor in, Ask Jeeves, if you can't figure that out, you're crazy. Now, I know I figured it out, and I knew Ask Jeeves really well. The minute we started doing Google searches, when we went in to see Larry and Sergey, we said, hey, can one of our guys play with the search engine while I talk to Larry and Sergey? And just because Google said we're based on relevance and page rank, those are really easy words today. But back in 1997, when you said, I have a search engine based on page rank. If other people like that page and they springboard off of that page, then that page must be awfully good. So I'm going to send more people to the pages that people like. And it was all motivated by relevancy.
So what did you think when you first met them? Where did you first meet them? Do you remember?
Oh, of course I do. On University Avenue, they had moved out of the garage in Menlo Park into the office.
The Lucky Office?
The Lucky Office. This is where
PayPal
was. And then I think Danger after that, which is now Android, was in that one office. So I actually heard about Google through David Cheriton, who's a very famous Stanford professor and a founder himself. We were at a holiday party 6 months before I actually met Larry and Sergey, and I said, "Hey, you're in the labs at Stanford. You know, what's cooking there?" Because David was an investor in our fund, and we said to all of our investors, you know, "Hey, David, you can invest in the fund, but you got to tell us when you see something interesting." So at this Christmas party, we were both in tuxedos, and we both hate tuxedos. I said, to get our mind off this, tell me about what's going on at Stanford.
To get your mind off the uncomfortable tuxedo.
Yes. You know, I'll introduce you.
Did he say, you should invest, this is going to be the biggest technology company of the decade?
David Cheriton was the one who said the two magic words, page rank and relevance. And back in 1997, those were not buzzwords. Those were like, hey, talk to me about. And then he explained what they meant.
So what did you think of Larry and Sergey when you met them? Did they seem like they were going to be super successful? Did you know as soon as you met them that this was like a historic company? Well,
because we've invested in 650 companies, by then it was probably 300 companies in 1997. You know, I had a good read on entrepreneurs, and keep in mind, for every company we invest in, we say no to 30. So we see a lot of entrepreneurs. So what I saw was two entrepreneurs that were great scientists, but very, very strategic and determined. Because they said to me, once they said, hey, we want you to invest, they said, hey, you have to go get Mike Moritz to invest in our company.
So you introduced...
Yeah, I introduced Sequoia to Google in that round. And I said, hey, Mike Moritz is a great guy. You know, but what made you pick him? Oh, well, he's on the board of Yahoo. And
because they wanted the Yahoo search deal.
Yeah, to bootstrap this company, because at the time, their Alta Vista was the search engine. They had to displace an incumbent. And they said, to do that, we got to do two big OEM deals. Yahoo's one. Moritz will arrange that for us if we get him. And that happened. And then they were already talking to John Doerr at KP, and I didn't have to figure out the Doerr piece. Doerr and KP were on the board of AOL. And
so they got Google and Kleiner.
Once they got both to agree to invest, then KP didn't want Sequoia, and Sequoia didn't want KP. That took a month of wrangling. And Larry and Sergey...
you almost got the whole deal yourself.
We almost... got the whole deal ourselves. After a month, Larry and Sergey said... Now, after a month, Google is exploding. You can tell that this is a technology that people are going to use for 50 years. And Google's 14 years old now. And Larry and Sergey got exasperated. And they called me one Friday and they said, hey, the first day I went in there, I said, hey, let's just do a quick $10 million round. I'll lead it. And I'm an angel investor, but I knew for this technology, we could round up the money and syndicate that. They said, hey, you said a month ago you could do that. Can you do it? And I said, I can do it by Monday. And I actually believed it, because then I knew even more about the company and the quality of these two founders. But I did call KP and Sequoia, and I said, hey, these founders are very determined.
They're going to do it with you or without you.
They're not bullshit artists. They really are telling you it's over on Monday. And I told them why. I said, I'm going to do the funding myself if you guys can't, get it together.
This is possibly the most generous moment in the history of Silicon Valley.
I just
you could have just not made that call, right?
Oh, of course.
But there's a lot of people in the venture business who would have made the call and said, "Oh yeah, they're bullshitting. Don't worry, they have no option except you guys."
Now here's
and the
another,
next they'd know, they'd read about the round.
Here's
in the press.
Here's another. Your wife thinks you're crazy. So Friday I called John Doerr and Mike Moritz. I said, it's over on Monday. Sure enough, it only took them just Saturday morning.
I know exactly what effect that.
And I was sitting in a Starbucks in Foster City. I don't know what street it was on. And I got the calls, and I closed the cell phone, and I said to my wife, "This is history." And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yes. The funding of the biggest company ever is going to happen."
So you knew it. You knew it early
I
on.
knew it like today is today.
But they themselves.
I don't always know it.
Yeah. Did you know it with Facebook?
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I did not get Facebook. But I get growth. And growth is the lifeblood of innovation. And every time I met with Zuck and Sean Parker, who was the president then, I met Facebook through Parker because we had gone through the Napster experience together. The growth was like this, and I said, you can't argue with metrics.
Every time you met them, the numbers were different. Right?
And they were way up to the right, and they were doing all the right things.
What did you think of Mark the first time you met him?
I met him at University Cafe in Palo Alto. It was just him and I, even though Sean Parker introduced us. I've never told this before.
You sure you want to?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, go ahead. All right. Conway.
I think everyone knows Sean Parker is an edgy person. And so I wanted to just tell Zuck, even though I had never met Zuck, hey, your president's pretty edgy, so just want to tell you that without him here.
Oh my goodness.
And Zuck, to his credit, said, yeah, I have figured that out. Now, Zuck's 19 years old at the time, and Parker's maybe 20 or 21. Parker's probably a few years older than Zuck. And Zuck goes, yeah, I figured that out. It was kind of a rocky start because it was like, oh, okay, so let's move. And Zuck was like, let's move on. What can you help Facebook do? And one of the huge things that SV Angel does is help companies get funded. We help Google with their funding issue. I help Twitter with their funding issues, especially in the benchmark round.
So did you get involved with Facebook's VC round?
Oh, yeah. So they had taken the Peter Thiel money, and they were getting ready to do the VC round. So, and Sean Parker, because of Napster, knew that angel investors at the time, that we could really help work with all these VCs and get them to close a round quickly and efficiently. Because the process can be really painful if you don't have forcing functions.
Did you essentially orchestrate a bidding war?
And with Facebook, no, I did not. No.